Hello and welcome to the 2 by 2. This week it's a solo episode, and I'm going to talk about how you can take home up to $400,000 next year in 2026. Yes, to some of you, that sounds like a big number, a big scary number if you're out there on your own trying to generate your own business and find your own clients. To others of you, that might say, I don't get out of bed for $400,000. And that is my base salary. And so today, what we're going to do is break down how do you reverse engineer consulting success? And, when you break problems down, starting with the end in mind and starting with the quantified result in mind, I think you get a much more streamlined, certainly easier to execute, and hopefully rapid path to reach that goal. So that's what we're going to talk about today. But first, let's talk about why $400,000. So I will say through my conversations with hundreds of other independent consultants, I can say everyone gets into independent consulting with a different goal in mind. For some of people, it is a purely financial goal, but for most people, it is a goal around autonomy, impact, mission, and flexibility, one where we can have a great impact on the success of someone else's business. For me, I think about that as my mission of helping our clients achieve both their professional and personal goals. But, let's not forget here that you have to pay the mortgage. And why $400,000? Well, I think when you're leaving a successful corporate role, $400,000 is kind of the baseline junior executive salary. It may be the salary for a executive, a director or executive director, including bonus, but it is a milestone that I think translates taking your role in corporate America over to a role working for yourself. I want to tell you before we get into this too, this is not me. I'm not about to give you any hacks or any easy way to get there. We're not going to go crush anything. This isn't about, any kind of like bro mindset out there about selling. We're going to reverse engineer this as a business case. And so we're going to break this down into what I hope you'll see are actually pretty attainable numbers and conversion rates and a funnel and what you really need to do at the outset of the year to reach the goal by the end of the year. So let's get started with this. $400,000 a year. I want to break it down first. That in terms of monthly time. So I think it's reasonable to assume that if you are dedicated to a independent consulting business full time, you are still going to take a vacation, right? So first, let's just take 4 weeks a year out of the equation here and look at what a normal working year at full time would be. All right. So that gets us to a revenue goal per month of $36,000. All right. Reasonable. Now, there's different ways we could break that down. You could have one client, and that one client might generate $36,000 a month. This, for many of us, is the dream scenario. But I have found that unless you're deeply embedded in a niche that has really big budgets and your work is really mission critical, this is rare. It's also a bit dangerous because it means you're putting all your eggs in one basket. So, the budget changes or the executive changes, which happens, every 13 months. You should just plan for that. This can be dangerous because you could be, working along at a happy clip and then not have room to do biz dev, not have desire to do biz dev because you've got one great client. And then if that ends, you're kind of at a loss. So it's hard. And I think not without risk. What if you had two clients? If you had two clients, they'd each have to generate $18,000 a month. Now, this is slightly more achievable, but it still requires working with organizations that have big budgets and big problems. And those organizations, I will tell you, have really long sales cycles. Come back to that idea of a sales cycle in a moment because I've had a learning this year I want to share related to that. So the other way to think about this is three clients at $12,000 a month each. By the way, I'm really happy here that $400,000 broke into 36, which this is just like pretty easy math. It's not forcing me to do any difficult public math, but three clients, $12,000 a month each. I'm going to call this one the sweet spot. All right. Why? One, it's a manageable workload. I think if you're working full time, you can manage 3 clients. It does require efficiencies. It does require you to have the ability to transfer your time between clients. I mean, that I don't want to minimize that's easy out of the gate, but I will tell you it is definitely possible. But it is a manageable amount of workload. It is healthy revenue. It's also healthy on a unit basis. So finding 3 clients that can each have a budget of $12,000 a month, especially if you are a fractional executive, fractional CMO, CFO, et cetera. Like now we're talking about, you've kind of expanded your client base, and this is highly attainable for even small businesses. I've paid fractional people for our business $12,000 a month. So this is the sweet spot. I also think because you're managing 3 clients, and you should be transparent with those clients that you are not the only client, there are 3 of you. It allows you to have conversations that enforce time management on your client side. So if you have 1 client and they're paying you $36,000 a month, they see your time as fully dedicated. It is much, much harder to have a conversation to reset that versus a client who from the very beginning understands the fractional nature of your work, is paying you a reasonable amount of money from a volume perspective, and it really gives you the permission, I suppose, to balance your work amongst clients and amongst future business development. All right, that's something you really can't forget in this business, is that your biz dev always has to be on. Beyond that, if you had more clients than that, let's talk about 4 to 6. I mean, I think it's possible to have a portfolio of clients with smaller budgets who come to you on, maybe you're on a small retainer and they come to you on an ad hoc basis for problems. I think here the risk is that you're kind of buried in the delivery and the admin burden of managing the complexity of 6 clients and and calendars. I think it would get hard. I think if you're at the point where you've got 4 to 6 clients, you should be thinking to one of 2 questions. First question is, if you're not making enough money for you to be happy about it, you should think about raising your prices or getting clients that could pay you differently. Or if you already have done that, you should be thinking about delegation and sharing your work with others and bringing on others to support. So that's kind of where you get to. For you math nerds out there, I want to challenge my public math. Believe in each of these scenarios, you're going to get to around $225 an hour. I know some of you think in hours. Those of you who listen to me know I think that's an error. Okay, I don't think it's a good strategy, but I know people do think like that. So that's about $225 an hour, which for full-time work, I don't know. I feel like that's pretty good. Uh, especially if you're just starting out. I think if you've been at this for 10 years, maybe you think that's low. I don't think I'd take it for anybody trying to negotiate with me, but if you are working full time, I think it's a healthy hourly rate. All right. So now that we have some of that baseline math established, we're going to do more math. Why did I make myself do so much math today? I don't know. Let's get back to process. I prefer that over math. So let's talk about the business development piece of this. Again, this is a funnel strategy. So those of you familiar with marketing, you guys work a funnel all the time. For those of you that may not, let me just explain the concept. You're going to put, let's say, 100 pennies into a funnel. Only a certain amount are going to make it to the next phase, or a certain percentage come out of that funnel. If you put a funnel beneath that, and let's say it's smaller, there's only a certain number going to come through that, et cetera. So we're going to break it down, what the conversion funnel would look like to get to this target amount of 3 clients. And in this example, I'll use 3 clients because I think it's just a good target. All right. So we're going to reverse engineer it. I've already done this math. So you're going to start, I will tell you the answer is 50 people. Okay. So we'll say 100, and maybe it is if you're just starting out, but let's imagine you started with a core group of 50 people in your network. And here, I would advise it's not a random 50. I think the qualifications to be in this core group of 50 are that they are at minimum warm connection, but hopefully someone you would stop and say hi to in an airport. It's sort of how I always think about what's the level of relationship of someone that I would want to be in this core network. And that could be a personal connection, or more likely a professional connection. All right. So 50 warm people, they also, in terms of criteria, they also should be people who fit your ICP, or said more simply, someone who likely faces that problem or is adjacent to a group of people who face that problem or who is a decision maker over a group of people that kind of face the problem that you solve. I'll get into that in a moment. The first step here is to define those 50 people. Now, let's say you reached out to each of those 50 people, likely via email, better yet via text if you have close close people here. If you're in a business or a person that picks up the phone, I'm not going to discourage that. I'm not, but a warm outreach to those 50 people. In this outreach, I advise you deliver value out of the gate. Well, what does that mean? It could mean a couple things. I mean, one way we do it is, let's say we have an offer that helps CFOs get a handle on their receivables in order to improve their liquidity position and ultimately cash flow. And so we've written a white paper that talks about the problems they face. We've done a lot of research on it. And we talk about that. And the white paper offers some solutions on how CEOs can go into their CFOs can go into their organization and assess this problem. And so, I might provide self-generated thought leadership. I might also provide thought leadership or other articles that I found elsewhere that might also be interested to them. So if you don't have your own IP, use somebody else's IP. If it's a close enough personal connection, obviously you can just write a personal note, right? But the point here is to reach out, deliver value in some way, and set up a conversation. So out of that 50, not everybody is going to accept that conversation, which is perfectly fine. Okay. People are busy. They have many, many, many priorities. And if someone doesn't accept the conversation, put them back in the nurture sequence and come back to them in a quarter or two. But I find that if you've done the work in choosing these 50 people wisely, you're going to get about a 50 to 60% response rate of people who will say, yeah, I'd be happy to catch up and get on the phone. Or if they're local, I like to meet people in person. I like Maudie's on Lake Austin. A lot of you know. Am I a regular there now? Maybe. But I think, you're really doing this well. Benchmark here is about 50 to 60%. And you just want to get these people on the phone. And in this phone call or conversation, what are you really trying to do? You're really trying to understand, you know, what is going on in their business. They'll call this a discovery conversation. But really here, this is a conversation where you're going to do most of the listening. This isn't telling people what you do. This is asking them how they are. I have something I call the Gretchen mentality, which is named after my great friend, Gretchen Cooper Athis, who for her entire life is really just the best conversationalist because you'll talk to Gretchen for 2 hours and realize she hadn't said a thing about herself. All she does is ask you questions about you. And for that reason, everybody loves Gretchen. And so that is the mentality that I advise you take into these conversations. This is about asking, how are they? How is their work? How is their life? How is their family? How is their business? Then bridge to questions that will ask about the niche that you solve. So let's continue to use the example of Cash Convert for us. I may be talking to someone who is a CFO, and my question to him might be, you ever heard about DSO being the canary in the coal mine? No, nobody has, because who's heard of that? So no, well, that's my lead in, right? Well, I believe that DSO, or days sales outstanding, which is a measure of how much working capital you have tied up in receivables, I think it's a measure of how efficiently an operation is run. The canary in the coal mine. Companies that understand their DSO, they typically have a good grasp of what's really happening in their operation, and it's typically well managed. Those who do not have an accurate grasp of their DSO, it's the first step to peeling back the onion into what are some of the leaky buckets, particularly in the financial operation. But I find it's like if you don't manage that, there's a lot of things left unmanaged. So anyway, having a couple of provocative questions like that allows you to have a really rich and meaningful conversation with someone, because now I'm listening and I am absorbing and I am allowing them to talk and think through their challenges. And that's the conversation I want to have with people, because when I hear about their challenges, then I can listen for the challenges that they have that my team can potentially solve. Right? So that's what we're doing in those first set of calls. Next, not every call you have will really become a prospect, right? Like, as I said, I'm listening for the challenges that they have and looking to match them with those we solve. We don't solve everything. In fact, I am Very, 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 very clear on what we do well and what we do not do well. And we don't do a lot of things well. And I don't really want to promote myself or my team as the solution to things I think we can't hit out of the park, because that's not why we're doing this. I do find, though, just general law of large numbers, somewhere between 15 to 25% of those calls that we have might express a problem that we could solve. Now, Keenan Reed is a network of now closing in on 125 um, executive and mostly ex BCG Bain McKinsey consultants. So, like, we have a breadth of problems that we solve. I do focus my outreach here, though, on some particular people, groups of people that I think have very particular problems, so that we are targeted in our outreach and how our business works. But we do have the luxury of solving many. You may solve several. You may solve one. I don't think it really matters. I think the point is here, not everybody's going to have your problem. You need to be judicious about what you can solve. And it's going to be about 15 to 20, 25% who might be what I would call a real prospect. All right. So now if we did the math, I'll do it for you. It's 8. That 50 has now become 8. All right. 8 real prospects. Money, budget, timing, all these things matter. And so you can't assume that those 8 are all ready to go right now, right? Like, that's not going to happen. But over the course of the year, I think continuing to develop those conversations and relationships, you could assume that you could get to 30%. And that's 3 clients, right? And there you go. There's your 3 times 3 a month times 12,000 equals 36,000 times, I guess, 11 months, counting that vacation month, gives you roughly $400,000. So there you go. There's your math. 50, 60% of that get you to 30, 25% of that get you to 8-ish, and then a third of those is going to get you to your 3. All right. So it didn't take one phone call to get there, did it? Took a lot of back and forth, took a lot of effort. It would take managing your sales as a process or a pipeline. And if you're listening to me and you've had any kind of career in any kind of well-run business, you know that sales works with a pipeline. It's a process. It's just a numbers game, y'all. And so that's what I counsel you to do. And let's not overlook the fact that this is real hard work, particularly for independent consultants who, by choice of autonomy, by choice of our skill sets, by choice of, we are people who are typically happier when a large majority of our work is done alone. This is hard, right? It's hard to continue. Also hard to not, you don't need to keep going. Although I would recommend you do keep, once you've got your engine on, you keep it running. It does take a lot of self-motivation. And for me personally, this is an area where I am not as self-motivated as I am in some other things. Like, you put me in a whiteboard with 3 interesting people and tell me they have a problem, I'm going to stay there for hours and get to a framework that helps us solve it. That I love doing. This I don't love doing, but it is the necessary evil. Think about this as every job has a broccoli bucket. Wise, now old man used to tell me, every job has your broccoli bucket. Okay. You got to eat your vegetables. This is not something you want to do, but it is something you must do. And the broccoli bucket of this job, for me at least, and I have heard for many of you, is this: grind. So maybe you make it easy for yourself. Maybe you think about like a chore chart you might make for a kid. Maybe you reward yourself after the first 10 calls. Maybe you give yourself stickers. I don't know. But, think of whatever mind trick you need to do to keep your momentum. The other thing I would recommend that has been incredibly helpful for me is I use a CRM. I used to use Excel because I found like the whole setup of the CRM, I don't know, it just for some reason it was like a wall I was going to have to climb, right? It was like I was going to have to put in 2 days into it, and I never had 2 full days. And how was I going to get it done? It didn't take 2 full days, by the way. I just chose Pipedrive because someone chose it for me. I mean, I'll be honest with you. Like, I think there's probably better options in the market in terms of ease of use for a solopreneur or a very small business. It has way more functionality than I think we can't even like consume the functionality that it has. But it does work really well right out of the box. Like, the implementation on it, maybe let's say it took me 3 hours. And then over the course of the last year or so, like, I've been customizing our pipeline and our templates and everything we do and our internal processes. And I do all that myself. And I'm non-technical. I have had no issues whatsoever. It's really been a great tool for our business. I think the downsides of Pipedrive, as long as we're talking about it, are that I think the AI capabilities, like the generative AI capabilities, both from around the email, are non-functional there. I would want a solution that not only filters my email, but finds prospect emails automatically. In my inbox, right? Like finds inbound automatically, that does research automatically, that drafts responses automatically. So if anyone is using a tool that does that, I've heard of Apollo and Outreach and Clay, and there's a million tools now, and I just haven't had the opportunity to research them. This does not do that. But just from organizing a workflow perspective, both for me and our internal operation, to get things through a deal structure and to get contracts done and signed and then invoiced and paid, all of that connectivity is there, and it's been very useful for us. One other thing I recommend here is a referral engine. So I talk about a referral flywheel and how referrals are really, once you get this moving, consultants business once in motion can stay in motion from good work done on repeat plus asking for referrals. It's been the case for us for a long, long time. The referral flywheel involves finding people, figuring out how new people fit into this idea of a core 100 or a core 50 um, contacts, and then staying in regular, finding ways to reach them that add value to them on a regular basis, organizing your outreach so you're touching everyone. That sounds bad. Sorry. So that your outreach to your general audience is once a month, and that you have personal outreach to this core audience at least once a quarter. That can be implemented once you have these three people in place. And we'll put that link in the show notes as well. Couple of caveats here. So if that's the process, what else? That's not it. Like there's a couple of other things you're going to need to have in place to make this work well. We'll start with the most basic, which is you got to be really clear on what problem you solve. We talk about this all the time. You hear about people talking about a niche. You can't convince people that you do something by saying, I do operations consulting. Sorry, but like, what the hell is that? It's way too broad. Better than that is to be very to the point. Instead of saying, oh, I do operations consulting, you may say like, oh, I help mid-market SaaS companies fix their churn by addressing, breakages in their onboarding process. That's really targeted. Why does that matter? It matters because when you have those 30 conversations and you say that, someone either says, oh gosh, our onboarding process, what a clusterfuck. Bingo, right? Or they say, yeah, I stay far, far away from customer success, which means we can safely remove that person from the list. Or they may say, oh yeah, it's not something that we cover, but I know that it's a problem for blankety blank, blank, blank. Okay, you get it. But you help put the pig in the chute, so to speak here, right? Having a statement that talks about your niche in a very clear way about what you do, who you help. Notice I help mid-market SaaS. That would be better actually if it was I help mid-market SaaS customer success leaders, right? Now I know who, and then what is the very specific problem that I solve, and what's the specific place in their onboarding process, right? Where you solve it. It just helps people kind of route that thought to the right person. Many people do many things. This term multi-hyphenate is being thrown around right now. Okay, that sounds like very fancy, but like when I started doing independent consulting work, I did pricing work and I did marketing work. And the two problems that I solved were different from one another. And so I had two statements. And when I would advise here, if you have two or three statements, at this point, I probably have six that I could do for myself. I only use one per conversation per person, right? Like you can show a different facet of your experience to a different person depending on who it is you're talking to. And I think a lot of people can get confused around this because they say, oh, I can do this, or I can do this, or I can do this. And then they say all of that, and then no one knows what they do. Better to lead with questions, to listen to the challenges that someone is telling you, and then go into your bag of tricks and pick out the trick you need to show them. All right, so that's my soapbox around having a niche. One example here, I'll just throw it out. Shout out to Terry, a Chevalier in North Texas. Terry, really interesting guy. He's been on the pod. We'll put the link. He may just be on the YouTube now, but we'll put the link to this video. It's really great. He does two things. He works with mid-sized businesses who are looking to exit within, I think it's like a 3-year term, and he helps get their operations and financials sorted and clean, and attractive to someone who might want to acquire them. And he helps rural broadband providers commercialize and run their operations. Okay, 2 really different things, but Terry has 2 statements. He has 2 pieces of thought work. He has 2 pipelines, and he runs this business. And from this, he's been a very successful independent practitioner. So it can be done. Terry's such a great example of this. So next thing I would consider a prerequisite is people need to see your name. I'm going to be really practical here. People need to see your name. This isn't just about, oh, you need to be on LinkedIn. People say, oh, you need to be out there. You need to be telling people what you do. You need to be marketing. Minimum efficient. People need to see your name. And they see your name very easily on LinkedIn. And they see your name when it's in their inbox. So think about practical ways that you can make this happen. I actually think you could just pick one. If you're just trying to find 3 clients at $12,000, like, you don't need a full-blown marketing campaign. In fact, you don't need a logo. You don't need a website. You don't need any of that. What you need is your name visible to someone on a repeating, consistent basis, right? So let's talk about these 2 ways. Show up on LinkedIn. We've written a ton about this. I feel like this is a nut that I've really started to crack for us. Bottom line is showing up on LinkedIn is a great way for your name to get out there. And there's a couple things that you need to do. One, you need to get over yourself. Okay, lots of people hate LinkedIn. By the way, I hate LinkedIn too. I think it's super annoying. I never actually read my feed or anything like that. I, in fact, think that I play a little character on LinkedIn, kind of like Beyonce and Sasha Fierce. But I play this character because that character is on brand, and that character talks about messages that relate back to those problems that I solve. In fact, if you're listening to this, you may have found me on LinkedIn because every day there's 3 posts that go out. 2 of them are about Keenan Reed strategies. And of those 2, one is about cash flow and cash convert. And the other one is about our general people services. And then the third one is directed to independent consultants and fractional executives sharing the content from the 2x2. You'll notice too, I am not emotional. LinkedIn is not a place I just don't think it is. Nobody wants to see it. In fact, it doesn't really matter if people read the posts or if they interact them. The point is that they see them. Another way you could do this, if you can't get out, just think 3 posts a week is probably your minimum. I actually don't, I think there's other ways you can manage this. LinkedIn has a great newsletter feature. In fact, Terry uses this. But the newsletter feature works like I use Beehive for the 2x2, but it allows you to write a newsletter once a month is probably sufficient, where you send out, 500 words of thought leadership, and your name will pop up when you send the newsletter out in LinkedIn, and it also pops up in someone's inbox. I think you can get around the annoying comment fear. The annoying feed fear on LinkedIn by commenting. You could decide every day you'll comment on 10 posts, and maybe you have a list of 100 people whose posts you comment on. Those people will see your name, right? So there are different ways to solve this problem beyond just being in the feed. The point is, look at the real estate in LinkedIn where you could make sure your name is consistently shown and make sure it shows up there. Email is the other way. Now, my opinion on email is that, yes, your name in the inbox matters, but your name without value in the email is trash. If you can't invest in, it's kind of like this, like LinkedIn, you don't have to invest a lot of thought, right? Like, this isn't hard to make comments on someone's LinkedIn page or to use AI to help you generate at least the draft of LinkedIn posts. But if you're going to send an email, you do need to invest time to make sure you deliver value. And again, here, this is an area where you don't have to write a white paper and send it every month. Terry's newsletter is a great example of delivering value in an email. He writes about a trending topic in the broadband industry, and his newsletters can get really technical. That's Terry's thing, right? So you can take your area of expertise and write something that is your perspective on a topic that can deliver value. Your perspective is valuable, and send that out to your network. The other, actually, let's leave email there. So then how do you take your name appearing and turn that into actual conversations? Again, like, this goes back to what we call the referral engine. And there is a nurture sequence. And this works the best when you do have a defined group of people that you send out high value and often customized emails to. And every so often in those emails, you might ask for a conversation or you might ask for an introduction to someone. That could be a general referral. It could also be a very specific introduction to someone you're targeting that they might know. But tapping your network on a regular basis, as long as your kind of ratio of value to ask is over 5 to 1, I think it's safe to make an ask. That's sort of the process you have to do. Is when you're thinking about, just to take us back to the beginning, when you're thinking about how will I get to $400,000 in a year, break it down. First is you have to define that core group of 50 people. Second is approach your sales process as a funnel and understand the conversion rates that you'll have at each part of the funnel. 50, in my experience, gets you to 3 eventually. Next is that referral engine. You need an always on way to track and nurture and keep in touch and keep your name top of mind related to the problem you solve. So when that problem arises and one of your connections worlds, your name comes into their head and they can get in touch with you. And finally, the thing you must do is you must be clear about that problem you solve. Because if you're not clear, then none of your phone calls will be clear. None of your value delivering emails will be clear. And clients or connections who hear of a problem won't connect you as the solution to that problem. So I'll ask the team to generate a worksheet. I think this is a real easy visual exercise to work through your 50 down to your 3 or your 50 down to your 2 if you're looking at higher ticket clients. We'll put that in the show notes. But thanks, and I wish you great luck in 2026. I can tell you, when you start doing this work and you start with one client, you think like at least my experience was, financially, I had covered my portion of our total expenses within a year. I was lucky that when I left my W-2 job, I left voluntarily with a voluntary severance package that was quite generous. And so I had a long runway until, the financial side was going to catch up. And by the time it never did, I had enough work to at least cover expenses within 2 years. And I did this, by the way, without following this process. Like, let me just be clear. This process became obvious to me once I needed to grow the business because I have other people on the team. But when it was just me, like, let's be clear, I was not doing this. I was waiting for people to approach me. So you can see here, it takes a lot longer. But by 2 years, end of 2 years, I had 2 clients. And that was tough because they were both, in their opinions, paying, a pretty high rate per month. And I was having to balance 2 demanding pieces of work where they didn't have a great expectation that I was fractional. I never got to 3 because of the nature of the kind of work that I do. What I did was once I got to 2, I started to replace myself at that point in the journey. And yeah, I don't think I could ever handle 3. But just again, like I do pretty in-depth strategy work. It's when it's on, it's on. I've slid back in points of time into doing two clients at the same time. And it's really challenging when you're doing that. And for me, trying to run the business for others. So I don't do that. I don't counsel you do that unless you're crazy like me. But yeah, I wish you the best of luck. I think this process works when you apply it and when you make it simple and when you cut the complexity out of the process. It's have a niche, have some thought leadership around it, have a process to regularly engage your clients or people, kickstart that process by identifying 50 people, outreach to them with value. Get your 30 calls, be clear and listen, ask a lot of questions in those calls, seek out the match of the challenge to the solution, and then be ready to close a deal once budget arises. There is one other thing here I was going to mention at that point, so maybe I'll throw this here as a bonus at the end. The sales process for selling consulting work. This is my 2025 learning. There are 2 types of buyers of consulting work. One buyer has a hair on fire. This is an emergency. I have to solve this now problem. Those are the buyers that we at Keenan Reed have typically served. That is how our client acquisition by and large has happened, where a buyer with a hair on fire problem talks to a friend who recommends us. And our business model is built to be turned on and turned off very quickly so we can jump on those and solve them immediately. That is our core capability. What I learned later was that most sales don't actually happen that way. Most sales are a function of good planning, and that in our business, where we're providing essentially a strategic capability as a service, that is a budget consideration that clients need and will be making long in advance of actually having conversation. And it is something that we as a firm need to get much, much, much better at in helping to be a part of those conversations early to help our clients think through what they do need, if that's us or someone else, helping them be more planful about the capabilities that could help that they could add on to help them achieve their goals. And those types of sales, those sales processes, they may be 9 months long. And that feels really, really long when you're a solo practitioner. But I will tell you is you've been on the other side of this and it's normal. It's either rejiggering budgets or asking for new budget. It's often dependent on initiative or investment being made in a new program, product capability, business line, et cetera. And the important part for us on the consultant side is to be a part of that conversation and to continue to maintain awareness of your ability and continue to be a trusted advisor who is objectively providing, guidance, value, what have you, to the client, regardless of if it's you or someone else, but like being an honest partner with them through that long process does pay off and is the way that many of these deals are won. So as you think about timing, you think about getting your 50. Remember that the 50 to 3 isn't going to happen in January. No, your 50 to 1 may happen in 6 weeks, maybe a quarter to 2. It may take, your other 2 may be a part of that longer sales cycle, and you may not see that happen until the back half of the year. But I would tell you, as I did earlier, good work done consistently compounds and it becomes great work. And that great work leads clients to refer you. And before you know it, you'll be at 3 clients, and then you'll get a phone call for a 4th, and you're going to wonder what to do. So I leave you with that today. I wish you the best of luck in 2026, and check out our resources in the show notes for some tools and tips that we've built that could help you.